Hi, Ezekiel. How you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for participating in this set of interviews that we're doing for the Morehouse students here. Um, so I guess just to quickly start us off, tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from?
Sure. So I'm currently located in Sydney, Australia. It's the lovely sunny part of Australia. I was born in Nigeria and then my family immigrated to Australia when I was much younger. So I spent most of my life here. I grew up a little bit further outside of Sydney, in a nice sort of coastal beach town. But yeah, I've found myself back in Sydney and enjoying life here.
Nice, nice, man. So how did you first hear about software development and what were some of your initial thoughts?
So I'm not sure exactly when I first heard about software development. I did kind of come across programming fairly early. So I remember one of my school friends when I was probably around in maybe year 7 or year 8. He used to make little video games using QBasic, which is sort of like a programming environment in DOS and Windows 95. So I used to kind of hang out with him. He would make some games and would play them, and I thought it was really cool. I didn't really understand what he was doing, but I thought, this is something that's kind of interesting. I was obviously grew up playing games as well, like a lot of people in the 90s. So that was another big part of my
Oh
life.
God, the 90s. Don't let them.
And then, yeah, a couple of years later, my older brother had a maths tutor. And I didn't realize at the time, but he was actually studying computer science. But we'd kind of hang out after he'd give tutorial lessons. And he got me kind of into reading about Linux and Unix and started kind of hinting at things towards programming. So I think that was probably my introduction to software development. Was a little bit more passive, but yeah, I didn't really understand what the different components were, but I found it kind of intriguing. Yeah.
Okay, so then if you were exposed to it first as a young kid, right? So then
Yeah,
you first then get into actual software development. What was that transition? How did that happen?
sure. I think that was probably a mixture of the influence of this maths tutor. My mother was a librarian, and she kind of was involved in the switch to the internet when that started happening within libraries. So we kind of always had a computer in the house from when I was a little bit younger. So I'd, jump on, play games, mess around. I managed to find a lot of ways to mess up the OS. Pretty sure one time I think I might have formatted the C drive, which didn't obviously end too well. So I didn't really know what I was doing, but I liked sort of tinkering around. But then at the same time, I was lucky enough to attend a school which had a fairly good computing kind of curriculum. We had quite a few good teachers now that I look back on it who had good knowledge of not just sort of general ICT concepts, but they had a good understanding of programming and what's sort of involved in the software world. So from about year 9 or so, I was taking classes at school in computer programming and software design. So I was able to do that all the way through from year 9 through to year 12. And yeah, through that point, it sort of solidified for me that this is something that I want to do. Initially, I thought I'd do something like chemical or mechanical engineering because I was a little bit science inclined, but my maths wasn't particularly great and I didn't really enjoy maths. But for some reason, the maths involved in computer science is a little bit more intriguing. So I think the first time where I really kind of came across a software developer was probably around, I think, mid high school. We had maybe around year 10 or 11 or so, we had an excursion to Sydney where we visited some software companies. And through that, it was, yeah, just a really kind of cool experience seeing their screens full of code, scrolling through, not knowing what they're doing,
Mhm.
and listening to them sort of sharing a bit of their day-to-day experience and problem solving and stuff like that. So that's probably where I first kind of got introduced into the role of software developers and what that could actually entail. Before that, it was more just I like computers and I like programming. So yeah.
Okay. So you refer to it as grade 9. I think here in the States, we just call it high school, right? So in high school is when
Yep.
you first got exposed to software development. Then you go
Yep.
into college. Did you major in computer science?
Yeah. So I and I actually started as studying software engineering, but I ended up shifting to computer science because I thought that I didn't really need to understand all the engineering side of software development, which is funny that I now work in a software engineering company. But yeah,
Just couldn't
so
stay away. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I studied computer science through university, and yeah, through that as well, I kind of worked in like a general ICT help desk sort of scenario. So the library, the university that we had, they were quite forward thinking with technology. So we had something called the Information Common, where
Okay.
essentially it's just like a lab full of computers that students could use. And through the course of my studies, they ended up making it 24-hour access. So students could go in at any time and just use the computing facilities for research or working on their assignments. We also had kind of collaborative and group learning sort of environments. And so part of this was that they needed people there to help with just general problems like printing, connecting to the Wi-Fi. I've lost my assignment because I didn't save it. What do I do?
Been there.
Sorry, can't help you. Save the next one. Yeah. So I spent a couple of years doing that while I was studying. And then through that, I managed to get involved with the educational resources development at the university. And I picked up a role as a web developer there. So while I was studying, I would work kind of part-time
Sure.
in this web developer role. And that was fairly general. It was just maintaining their website, uploading PDFs, downloading PDFs, very kind of rudimentary stuff. But over time, it evolved into a little bit more. So we started building online interactive tutorials, particularly for students from non-English speaking backgrounds or students who are new to university. Yeah, so I think that was probably more interesting than my studies at the time because that was a bit of real world experience. Yeah.
Well, that's great because most people here, at least in the States, right? You generally get that experience through an internship. You were lucky enough to while you were actually working. So, did you at any point during here in the States, we refer to it as like the summers where you have like the summer off? Did you have going to school? Did you ever have sort of a formal internship, or was it done predominantly during your time at school, while you were in school, rather?
It was mostly through school, and that was partly the opportunities, definitely. But I just had too many other interests. So like I love playing football or soccer outside of work, and I love playing music. So I'd often play in bands and things like that. So I didn't really apply myself in that scenario as much as some of my peers. But I think having the ability to work while I was studying definitely helped. The closest thing I kind of did was a few years later, I ended up working in government technology. And so I did something called a fellowship, which is kind of like a year of focused research and prototyping. And we were really kind of working on kind of bringing concepts of digital innovation into technology. It sounds a little bit cringy now because we've probably all heard all the buzzwords, but this is, 5-6 years ago. So even mentioning the thought of agile practice or prototyping government technology was pretty foreign. So that was probably the closest thing I did to an internship. It was a bit broader than just working in software development because we worked in things like user-centered design and kind of ideation and rapid prototyping. So I think it was quite an interesting experience. And I kind of wish I'd done something like that earlier in my career as well. But yeah, it was nice when it did happen.
Yeah, okay. So you graduate from school. So tell me about, you have this experience while you're at school, right? You're also playing soccer and in a band, so you're clearly talented. So then tell me, what was your first role out of college?
So essentially, once I graduated, I continued working for the language center at the university. So I think that's probably my first role.
Okay.
At that time, the role sort of changed a little bit and it became a bit more exploratory. So we started doing things like migrating Flash animations and Flash educational resources into JavaScript and HTML and CSS. So there was a lot more kind of, for me at that stage, complexity involved in the role. And so I guess after that, the next role I went into was a similar sort of role, just in another university. So I ended up doing another kind of software developer role, working in educational resources within a library. So I think the two kind of blur a little bit for me. Yeah, that was essentially the first role. But these were really sort of general web developer roles like they were back then. So you do a bit of everything. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So tell me now a little bit, or tell us rather, a little bit about your current role in GitLab, right? And how it relates to the people who actually see and use our product.
Sure. So I'm a front-end engineer, and I'm working in the manage stage of the DevOps lifecycle. So manage, I think, is quite an interesting area because we kind of work on features that sort of tie together a lot of GitLab. So things like access control and compliance, importing information from other DevOps platforms. And then the team I work in directly is optimized. So we work on kind of drawing insights from GitLab installations, try to help engineering managers and product managers and other, I guess, managers in general understand the value of what they're doing with GitLab and sort of find ways to improve their processes. So, I mean, how this sort of plays out is that we kind of build things like charts and tools to help visualize what's happening within a company's DevOps process based on the data that we get in GitLab. And I guess aside from that, I'm also a front-end maintainer. So I sort of spend a lot of my time reviewing code, not just from GitLab staff, but also community contributors, and sort of shepherding features along the way that might need a little bit more assistance. And I also get the opportunity to then work on features that cut across the entire GitLab code base, which is quite fun and interesting and challenging.
Great, thank you. Let's dive a little deeper in that. So help me understand. So when you say you update features, you work on features, where are you getting this feedback from that these are the features that GitLab needs to work on? Who tells it? Where do you collect that from?
Yeah, so I mean, I work quite closely. We all work quite closely with our product managers, who kind of the interface with our clients. Clients also just comment directly on issues and merge requests and just say what they want, which is always fun, especially when things are in progress. Yeah, so a lot of it gets driven from the product direction. So I guess from a front-end engineering perspective, a lot of what you're doing is kind of interfacing between product managers, designers, and our back-end engineers. Because a lot of the core business logic of what GitLab does is in these back-end libraries and frameworks that we have.
Gotcha.
And then we have ways to expose that through APIs, but we also need to present it in a way that users can actually operate them and interact with them to achieve goals. So a lot of it is kind of liaising between designers and back-end engineers to say, this is the goal that users have. How can we actualize it based on the data that we have available and the UI components that we have available? So sometimes that means building out more components so that we can achieve the aesthetic that we want. Or it might be working with backend engineers to add more data or building out API endpoints ourselves to increase the amount of data that we have available.
Gotcha. So we'll get our users who give you feedback, the product managers who give you feedback, who say, Ezekiel, this is what we want to see changed. Go ahead. All right. So say you then make the change. Do you then directly go back to the product manager and say, look, this is the change that we're thinking about. Let's hear that feedback. And then do you then test it like amongst people in the community first before it's then ultimately released to the public?
So I think for the first question, we work quite closely. So as we're kind of building out features, we keep the product managers quite involved in the process, so they understand how things are progressing. And part of the reason for that is this ability to work a bit more agile. So as we have more stakeholders involved in the process, we see some of the shortcomings. A lot of the time, it might be things like we just don't have the data in the right format that we can present it in the flow that the user journey is supposed to happen. So we can kind of work through with them these sorts of things, which helps make the, I guess, when you need to either sacrifice or amend requirements, we can kind of check that with the product managers, and they can either run that by customers or make the decisions themselves on where we can kind of change the direction a little bit. So that helps quite a bit.
Yeah.
In terms of actually testing, we do a bit of everything. So our team, particularly, the feature areas we're working on are still fairly early on in their maturity level. So we do a lot of dog fooding ourselves. We've got some relationships with a few other areas within the company who are using a lot of our features. So they give us a lot of direct feedback. And then we also routinely kind of have some, I guess, reach out to customers and conduct surveys and things like that on the features that we have. How we actually roll them out, we generally will roll out features within our team first as they're sort of in flight. This helps things like the designers to get a feel for how a feature actually works within the GitLab code base. And we have ways to kind of turn them off or turn them on for certain users. So we generally roll them out within our team first, then roll it out for like a wider group of users, perhaps our whole stage. And some features we have particular buy-in from customers, so we might just enable it for them first or clients to get their early kind of their early reactions to how this feature operates and to find ways we can improve. And then the rest of it just kind of comes out once you have it fully rolled out.
Gotcha. Okay, that answers that. Thank you very much. So why did you choose front-end engineering specifically?
I didn't really choose front-end engineering. I think it chose me.
There you go.
That's probably the best way to think about it. It was just one of those things where I don't know, like quite a few years ago, front-end engineering wasn't really seen as a discipline as such. You had these sort of more general web developer roles. Anything user interface related or front end was generally seen as just the icing on the cake. So it was sort of like, yeah, you need to learn a little bit about JavaScript, but just so that you can make a pop-up appear on the page, and learn a little bit about CSS just so that the templates all look the same. But I think it was kind of maybe a mixture of my personality and the things that I enjoy. I did always quite enjoy working closer to like designers and actual customers on the end who are using these services. And I guess the best way to kind of interface with them is through front-end engineering, where you're dealing directly with the things that people see on the screen that help them enable some sort of process. I think generally I'm not a terrible communicator, and I can understand a lot of what people are trying to convey in different messages. So I think it sort of just fit my personality a little bit more than maybe other roles. And it was just the nature of, I got interested in JavaScript more and more, invested some time in it at some point, and then all of a sudden someone says, hey, you know some JavaScript, you're a front-end engineer. And you go, okay, I guess I'm a front-end engineer now.
There you go. There you go. All right. So let me take me back here. So think back. You said you've been with GitLab now about 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So what skills had you developed 2 years ago that made you attractive to GitLab, you think?
I think definitely communication is probably one of the main things. And this fellowship that I did kind of really helped with that process. So I was forced to spend a lot of time. I was working in a government department in actually in the legal sector. So it was completely out of my depth, out of my knowledge. But finding ways to kind of bring staff along and through the process of research and prototyping, finding ways to sort of like work in areas that are outside my comfort zone. I think these were probably all some of the skills. Maybe that sort of curiosity to dive into something that's not fully scoped out, but we have a little bit of a direction in it, and just get the ball rolling. I think that probably helped. I also was lucky enough to spend a little bit of time working remotely before I joined GitLab. So I spent sort of 6 to 8 months traveling around, and I was working for a company in Australia, in Melbourne, actually, while I was in Europe. So I had a little bit of that experience of what it's like to work remotely and kind of know some of the limitations of that and some of the areas that you need to focus in. So I think those were probably two of the main areas, and I guess the skill set that I have as well were probably attractive at that time.
Nice, nice. So now that you've been here 2 years, what additional skill sets have you developed while you've been here at GitLab?
I think, interestingly, one area that I've really enjoyed is this kind of working in the open. So I'd been lucky enough to do that a little bit, but
Hold on, when you
particularly
say
think,
open, what does that mean?
oh, so working transparently, um, working in a situation where anyone can essentially see what
Ah,
you do in the day to day. So I had a little bit of experience with this when I was doing the fellowship, because we did try to push government towards working with open source technology, and opening their own repos for the products they're designing and things like that. But on the GitLab scale, it's a lot, you feel a lot more exposed, I guess, generally. And that's something that I've just kind of grown to be comfortable with. Even when you're doing things like reviewing other people's code or putting out code yourself, it can be a bit daunting when you know that you push it out. It's probably not perfect, but in the back of your mind, or in another issue, you know that there is a path for this thing to be improved. So I guess having that confidence to just release things and take the iterative steps to getting towards a solution have been some of the skills that I've learned.
nice.
Iteration is probably the hardest thing, I think, at GitLab.
Mhm.
It definitely is for me. I think it is for quite a few people as well. So I feel like I've improved in learning how to iterate effectively, but every milestone kind of just throws up slightly different challenges. So it's kind of nice that there's something that you always have to iterate on iterating, which is
Right,
iteration. So
right. So what's something now that now that you're a full-fledged professional, right? What's something you
Mhm.
could tell your 20-year-old self who was thinking about the job market back then?
um, yeah, I mean, it's the idea of sort of generalist web developers back then was probably pretty pervasive. But I probably still would go back and tell myself to just pick a couple of areas and really focus on those. I spent a lot of time kind of chasing different frameworks and languages, sort of like trying to keep up with things as they changed. So I think perhaps I might have gone back and told myself to just be okay with finding the area that you really enjoy and kind of delving deeper into that. The rest of the stuff you can kind of pick up as the job demands, and that's also, I guess, because now there are so many more specialized roles in software development. You can move into front end, back end, DevOps, SRE, release management, whatever you want. But I think finding the area that's probably of most interest to you and just sort of honing in on that is probably something that would have saved me a lot of time, basically.
So how do you see the industry transforming in the next few years? And what advice would you give to some of our students who are watching this video right now?
Um, yeah, that's a tough one. I think we'll probably see this trend of specialized roles kind of continuing, just as software development practice becomes a bit more complex as it has over the last few years. There's further need for areas of particular expertise. So I guess probably like uh, things that I'd suggest for people who are looking for roles are focusing on knowing how you learn, and knowing, I guess, being comfortable knowing that you won't know everything about everything, and that's probably okay. Even today, I find that like I've spent a lot of time working with programming and computers in general, and every day you come across something and you just think, I had no idea that's how this thing works, or I've never heard of this particular area. So I think we're probably going to just continue to see this change occurring. So it's probably good to just be aware of what's changing, but also be okay learning what you need to learn to keep up with what you're interested in.
Nice, nice. So that I think about wraps up my questions. Anything else you want to leave the students with? Any other gems of knowledge?
Oh, I don't know. I think just if you're coming to this industry, one thing that I found quite helpful is, like I mentioned, learning how I learn. So for me, that was about being more effective in how I take notes, and things like that. So that's really helped me sort of keep up. But I'd also say, uh, if you have areas that you're interested in that aren't directly related to your work, that's super important. So for me, I was interested in kind of visual art and creative coding for quite a while. And that helped me learn a whole bunch of skills and keep interested in different areas related to programming that they don't come out in my day-to-day role, but they give me kind of goals to pursue outside of what I do and keep me interested in the area.
Nice. Well, I think that's about it, Ezekiel. Thank you so much for your time, my friend.
No worries. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.